This mini gaming PC is coming in at just 4.6 liters, powered by an RTX GPU, and we've got a new Ryzen 9000 CPU. What's going on, everybody? It's ETAPRIME back here again. Today we're going to be putting together one of my favorite mini PCs of 2024. This is coming in at 4.6 liters, and it's capable of running games at 1440p. Throughout the build, I will be going over all the parts used. I'll also leave links in the description in case you want to put something like this together. But before we get started, I do want to mention that this video is sponsored by Vip-Urcdkey Keys. I've been using this site for a long time. They offer Steam keys, Uplay, Ubisoft, but the main thing I usually pick up over here are Windows 10 Pro OEM keys. And right now, if you use code ETA, you can get 25% off, bringing the price down to $17 for that key. And keep in mind, this will also work with Microsoft Office products. We'll use code ETA. As you can see, brought it down to that $17 price mark. Personally, I use PayPal just to have that security, so we'll go ahead and check out. They're going to email that code to you, and now we can use that code to activate Windows 10 Pro. I'm going to head over to my updates and security. We're going to go to activation. As you can see, I've got Windows 10 Pro, but it's not activated. So I'm going to change product key. I'm going to paste it in here, choose next. Choose activate, and Windows is now activated. We're ready to go. They'll email your code once your payment is processed, and that's basically it. If you're interested in picking up cheap Windows 10 keys for your new PC builds, I'll leave a link in the description. These AM5 Mini ITX boards can get quite expensive, and it actually took me a while to go Mini ITX with AM5 because of this reason. But once ASRock released their A620i Lightning, that's when I jumped right on it. And with the latest BIOS, this board is compatible with Ryzen 9000. Speaking of Ryzen 9000, for the CPU here, we're going with that AMD Ryzen 7 9700X. 8 cores, 16 threads, based on Zen 5. And I'll tell you, it's not that far off from the 7700X, but you can get pretty cheap right now. I'm sure there's a lot of people selling used ones over on eBay right now. So if you did want to save some cash on the CPU side of things, you could definitely go with that 7700, and you're still going to see some really great performance. When it comes to RAM, I'm going with 32 gigabytes of Kingston Fury at 7600 megahertz. Obviously, we need DDR5 here for the AM5 platform, and we're going dual channel with it. And by the way, I've already installed my M.2 SSD, Kingston Fury 1 terabyte PCIe 4.0 drive in here. Next thing we need to talk about here is the cooler, and that 9700X does not come with a boxed cooler, so you'll have to add something. For this, I went with a CPU cooler I've used in the past, the Thermalright AXP 120X67. Comes with a 120mm fan. Once everything's assembled, it's actually 67mm tall, and it will fit inside of the case we opted to use here. And again, I have used this cooler in the past, up to around 130 watts. This offers some really great cooling performance, so I think with the new 9700X in this small form factor build, it's going to work out just fine. And thinking about small form factor, we had to keep this thing as small as possible, so I opted to use the LZ Mod A24 V5 version 2.5. There's a bunch of these listed over on AliExpress, and unfortunately I've not seen these for sale over on Amazon. They are on eBay. But I got mine from AliExpress, and the main reason I like this is because it's a 4.6 liter case that supports a dual slot low profile GPU. Not a lot of room in here. We obviously have to use a mini ITX board. That AXP 120X67 Thermalright cooler fits in here perfectly, and this is one of my favorite coolers for a build like this. Now it's time to talk about the power supply, and the A24 does support a flex power supply, or you could go with Pico if you wanted to. Recently, I've been using these 500 watt fully modular APEVA power supplies. They're $50 over on Amazon. This is the third one that I'm going to be using. Haven't had any fail just yet. Fully modular makes it really easy for cable management, especially inside of this small form factor case. And this is something I can definitely recommend for a build like this. And the price on these is spot on. Sometimes you can actually find these for around $34 on sale. But as you can see, this is actually going to mount right in here with the bracketing system. And we'll need to run our power cable up to the power supply. And the final thing we need to add here is a graphics card. The A24 supports a dual slot low profile GPU. You can go with a single slot if you want to, but for this, I'm going with an RTX 4060. When it comes to low profile dual slot cards, there are a few that are more powerful than this card, but the price on those is around $1,000 to $1,500. These are around $320 on Amazon right now. 8 gigs of GDDR6 does require an 8-pin PCIe connector. And really, if you're trying to build this small, you can't beat this card at the time of making this video here. It's definitely a great performer, especially with NVIDIA's frame gen. And if you're only going to be going with 1080p, you could go with the low profile dual slot RTX 3050, but it's really a cut down desktop version, and you're not going to see the kind of performance that you would with this low profile RTX 4060. These systems go together really nicely. As you can see, it's a pretty clean build here, and it really comes down to using that modular power supply. So we'll see if this thing boots up. Looking good so far. Now what I need to do is install Windows, get everything updated, and install some games on this unit. Okay, so I've got Windows 11 Pro here, updated all of the drivers. I've installed some games and benchmarks that we're going to be testing out, but there was a few things that I'd like to take a look at first. So as you can see, we've got that 9700X, 32 gigs of DDR5 at 7600, and of course that low profile RTX 4060 with 8 gigs of VRAM. This is the second time I'm going to be testing out the 9700X, and in my first video we actually used an MSI board. I haven't messed around with anything in the BIOS except for setting that XMP profile on the RAM. I wanted to take a look at the TDP here because it is lower than I expected. On this board, the way it is right now with the latest BIOS update, we're up to 87 watts. Now, in my other build, this was actually up to 140, but we had a much better cooler. And of course, I could modify this, bring that wattage up on this 9700X with this board, but we're working with a very small form factor unit here. And so far, temps are actually looking pretty decent at around 87 watts. Through all of my testing, I will have hardware info running in the background. That way, once we're done, we can actually take a look at all of the averages and the maximums when it comes to temps on the GPU, CPU. We can take a look at TDP, TGP. But before we get to that part, we definitely need to get into a little bit of testing. And the first thing I ran here were a few benchmarks. Geekbench 6 coming in with a single core of 3,349, multi 16,745. And when comparing these scores to, let's say, a Ryzen 9700X, looks like single core is coming ahead by about 14%, multi-core by about 13%. Next up, I ran Cinebench R24. We got a total multi-core score of 1,105. And again, I have seen this much higher at a higher wattage in the last build I did, but it's a much larger build. Moving over to some GPU benchmarks, 3D Mark Steel Nomad, 2,294. With Firestrike, we scored a 26,372. And finally here, with TimeSpy, 11,003. These are definitely respectable synthetic scores given the form factor of this unit, but we need to check out some real-world gaming, so we're going to get right into it. First one we have here is Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3, 1440p, ultra settings, DLSS is set to balance, and we are using NVIDIA's frame gen with this. At the end of this benchmark, we had an average of 171, and our 1% low was right there at 78. Now I'll tell you, frame gen is really going to help out at 1440p, and realistically, if you don't mind running this at a native 1080p, you're going to see amazing performance. Next game we have here is Cyberpunk 2077 1440p, ultra settings, DLSS is set to auto, and again, frame gen. It's just the way to go with this card here if you want to run games at 1440p. But with these settings on this small form factor machine, we saw an average of 84 FPS by the end of this run, and it does look really good here. I mean, 1440p, even with some DLSS on a decent monitor, looks amazing with this game. Red Dead 2 1440p Ultra DLSS set to quality. Every time I get into this game with these higher resolutions and higher settings, I kind of remember how good it looks because I'm usually testing on iGPUs, smaller mini PCs. Got to lower those settings down with those, but you know, going into this at 1440, it just kind of reminds me how good this game really is. Fallout 4 Ultra 1440p, 144 FPS. So I actually exited this game a couple times because I didn't think it was possible to run it at this high of a frame rate with ultra settings at 1440p on the RTX 4060. I know it's an older game, but I mean, it's pretty awesome that we're able to do this. This is one of my favorite PC games of 2024. Now, I know the game's older than that, but it was recently ported over to PC, and I've been playing the heck out of it on everything from lower-end handhelds with iGPUs to higher-end systems. Right now, we're at 1440, very high settings, DLSS set to quality, and we're getting over 100 FPS on the RTX 4060. And finally, Horizon Forbidden West, 1440p, high, DLSS set to balanced, and with this, we do need frame generation if we're going to be running at 1440p on the 4060. That's just how it is, and I really hope for some more PC optimizations for this game, because I've run into a lot of issues with lower-end cards. But, with that frame gen enabled, you can definitely play it at these higher frame rates. Like I mentioned, through all of my testing, I was monitoring the TDP, CPU, and GPU temps, and when it comes to the TDP on this 9700X, with the setup here, no modifications in the BIOS, on average, around 67 watts, and through all of the gaming, it only hit a maximum of 88 watts. The 9700X can go higher than this, but then we'll be kind of limited by thermals. Average CPU temps, 58 degrees Celsius, maximum only 77 degrees Celsius. This is one of the reasons I love the Thermalright AXP120X67. And of course, GPU temps here, on average, 54 degrees Celsius, and the maximum we hit here was 74 degrees Celsius. So that's through all of the benchmarks and testing. I think it's doing a pretty decent job when it comes to thermals also. Overall, this is definitely one of my favorite custom mini gaming PCs. Of course, it would be nice if we had more GPU power here, like a low profile dual slot RTX 4070, but unfortunately they don't make it. So this is kind of maxed out at 4.6 liters. And for 1440p gaming with some DLSS, maybe even some frame gen, or 1080 Ultra, this is an awesome little setup. But that's going to wrap it up for this one. If you're interested in putting something like this together, I will leave links to everything down below. And if there's anything else you want to see running on this, be it more PC games, a different operating system, let me know in the comments below. And like always, thanks for watching.